All right. Other than filling up the transmission and double checking for leaks, which I am getting ready to do here in just a bit, the transmission pan repair and cooler upgrade is finished. You can see the opening here I cut in the door. Looks pretty good with the grate in there. I'm happy with it. Always could be better, but that keeps debris from coming through. It's a lightweight aluminum mesh, and we open it up here, you can see put a little lip made out of a piece of the aluminum I cut out to make there be a little bit less space. You can see here that it'll just barely clear there underneath, so that air doesn't try to go under the cooler as much as through it. This opening is pretty much perfect height with that at the top, so I'm okay there. I thought about putting one here, but I don't think there's really much reason to, so I'm going to try it the way it is. But looks pretty good, securely bolted in, and shouldn't rattle or go anywhere. I could come back and trim some of this off. Get you in focus here. Trim some of this off here if I choose to, but it's so lightweight. I mean, I trimmed it with regular scissors, so it's super lightweight, which is perfect because I don't need any more weight. I got plenty and I'm adding more. But the cooler is all plumbed. I showed you before how it's wired. And now I have the hoses done. So we have a 3/4 inch -12 hose coming out of here that went originally through here into here for the original coolant heat exchanger. In fact, this is that original hose, and it is now the output. So I have a new hose coming up to the input on this side. It'll go through the cooler and out this hose and back to the original cooler. So in theory, there is no way for it to be worse than it was, because it's getting the radiator heat exchanging no matter what. But on top of that, it now has this air-to-air heat exchanging, which has the built-in 2 8-inch fans. Get over here so you can see that. And I worked out a thing with some fittings. I don't really like it, but it's functional, to go from that 1/8 inch port up to a 3/8 fitting that lets me put that temp switch in there. It kicks open, or creates a circuit rather, at 185, and that grounds the relay and runs the fans. And then when it gets down to 175, it will break the circuit, which ungrounds, breaks continuity for the ground on the relay, and turns off the fans. The fitting I bought that was a 1/8 temp switch wouldn't go into the 1/8 hole because it was too long. And 1/8 NPT couplers aren't big enough to let it slide through. And so I had worked it to try to make the 1/8 one work, and I couldn't. So I went back to the original, which was a 3/8 NPT, and built this. And the elbow gives me enough depth for the switch to hang out in here, and fluid should fill that because it's under pressure. And we'll check for leaks momentarily, but it does ground through the case of the transmission. And hopefully there's enough ground through the transmission to the battery for it to work. Have not tested that yet. If there isn't, I will run a little ground. There used to be a ground strap. You might be able to see it dangling way up there. And there's nothing for it to hook to up there. But I may run a new ground strap from this PTO cover down to here, or maybe this bolt, or maybe from one of these bolts that holds this bracket on. I don't know which, but if I need to, I can run a quick ground Doesn't need to be very high gauge because the only thing using it is the fan relay. So I could probably even just run like a 10 gauge or 12 gauge little bitty wire, but we'll see how it works. So now I have the fun task of filling 6 or 8 gallons of transmission fluid back in this bad boy and starting it up and checking for leaks. I have not yet gotten to build the skid plate grate guard protector thing. I did buy some angle iron and such, which is laying up here still in the floor. I think I will be able to use these slightly bigger ones for the lips that go front and back, or across the front and back, and these real skinny guys running front to back over it. For 3 or 4 of them should be sufficient. I'm not trying to add a bunch of weight, and all it's really doing is giving stuff something to glance off of. So I have not yet tackled the steering booster exchange or swap or putting the rebuilt pump back on. I managed to get the pressure relief valve, which on this one is up here, unstuck on the new pump, but I messed up the gasket for this little output. So I've got to call Luke on Monday and see if he can get me one of those, because I'm guessing with 1,000 psi regular gasket material won't be sufficient, but we'll see. So that's where I'm at so far. A little bit of progress, and we'll take one step at a time. Alright, I think I've got the leaks touched up. Hard to hear over the engine, but you can see we're creating enough airflow to hold that there through the grate, even though the grate isn't touching, so it's doing its job. I've got the fan hardwired for a minute just to test that. Alright, so now that the engine's off, you can actually hear me. I filled up the trans, fired it up. I had one small leak where the sensor went in to the elbow there. The instructions say to use no thread locker or thread sealant because it's making its ground through that brass fitting. And so I didn't. And none of the other fittings between the trans and the first adapter or the other 2 leaked. But where that sensor went in, I tightened it and tightened it and tightened it until I was afraid I was going to strip it, and it still slowly seeped. So I took it back apart and put just a real thin amount of thread sealant back 2/3 or so of the way up the threads, and threaded it all back together, and it doesn't leak, but it does still ground. If I touch that little terminal sticking up with the wire down to the body, then it grounds. So it should do just fine. The other thing that I did while I was here, because I had all the stuff, is install a street elbow to a ball valve to a quick connect. This is the secondary fuel filter, and this is the ideal place to prime the engine because it comes out of here straight into the rail in the head, the integrated fuel rail to feed the injector units. So all I did was take out a plug, kind of like this one, and thread this guy in with some good thread sealant suitable for diesel, and it fired right up after, so I didn't lose prime. But what I have, in case I ever do lose prime or run it out of fuel, is the Detroit diesel prime pump that they sell specifically for these engines. It is a little hand pump. It's designed to be mounted on a bracket and just stay there in line, but I just think that's kind of weird. So instead I put nipples on it and put some fuel line. And on one end, I put this guy, which can go up on that fitting. And on the other end, just as a bit of a weight, I stuck a street elbow, though that can be taken off. It's not even clamped. And this can be dropped down in a container of diesel fuel, although that's remnants of transmission fluid, but that would work too. And once that's down in there, what you do is twist this right here to unlock, and then, see if I can do it with one hand, it extends. And when you push down, it pumps fluid up the line to fill that filter. And so you can just pump this guy probably a fair bit, because when I tested it with just regular fluid, it took a while to draw fluid up, but I can hand pump and fill the secondary filter, and then it'll start. Ideally, that will draw fuel through the main lines and push fuel through the return line and make sure there's no air. So that's supposed to be the ideal place to do it. If this turns out to be too much work, all I have to do is take this hose off and connect a bug sprayer bottle. That's what some people do. That takes up a lot more space though. This fits in my toolbox. It's pretty small. So that's my plan. Hope I never need it, but I should be prepared in case I do. And all you got to do is open that valve once you've pumped a bunch of fluid, and then you'll prime the system.